Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Patreon Supporter Spotlight number 63. Got two tanks and a warships replay for you today, and we're kicking off with this slightly older one from I Be The One True Nub. I am still incidentally having grave issues in watching replays since the 1.0 patch hit. I can still basically only manage to watch current patch replays. Despite having the clients, despite trying various different things, I just cannot watch 1.0 and 1.01 replays at all. It's really annoying. I've probably missed some really good stuff. So if you send me in some replays that cover that period, then that's why I've not been even able to watch them. And I'm just going to have to be much more proactive about watching current patch tanks replays that people send me. So anyway, it's annoying, but I can't really do anything about it. No solutions have presented themselves. So, Super Ranger here, as he is otherwise known on Twitch, he has the 100mm gun on this tank, which isn't something that maybe you see all that often. It really only does a little more damage than, say, the long 88 that Tiger P is packing. But if you compare it to the 122, it basically has a bit more reliability in terms of its gun handling. It's got a better aim time, and I think better bloom stats, and I'm pretty sure it's got better accuracy as well. But it doesn't have that punch that the 122 has. And when you're fighting people at this range, given that you've got the exact same amount of average pen with both guns, that punch can be rather desirable. So it's a matter of personal preference. I don't think you're going to massively be giving up anything if you use the 100mm gun. Some people prefer the reliability. So he's here with some allies, which was a useful thing, because that Black Prince might have been a problem otherwise, but given that they just ploughed forward into him, they gave a perfect shot to the Conway. And I don't know if the Rev got any hits in there as well, but although he's lost some health, he's not done too badly damage-wise, and he's actually about to get another hit in there. There we go, against the artillery, although no kill this time, which would have been nice. It's always satisfying killing artillery, but as it is, they got away with just a slither of health. On the other side, meanwhile, well, there's not been a lot of movement on the Banana Street on the 8 line. But they have at least taken the hill, although it looks like his teammates aren't especially pushing down as of yet. Of note, perhaps, is that although this is 357, this is one of those rare instances where there are actually top-tier platoons on each team, so it is at least even. But one of the enemy top-tier tanks is a T95. This is about as perfect a map as you can get for the T95, so that might prove to be a problem. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's come back to the cap, because the enemy team didn't hugely venture away from their cap. Apart from the Black Prince and the Tiger P and the two artilleries, nothing really came out on this flank. So there's a whole lot more left to deal with at this point. Unfortunately, at least for Super Ranger, because he's right here in the front line, of course. So as it stands, this is a rather tricky situation. The only real immediate backup he has is the Conway, who is trading with that 5120 at the moment and losing quite a lot of health in the process. And the medium tanks that managed to get into that little pocket there beside the cap, well, they're a bit of a problem as well, especially that Primo Victoria, because that gun is easily going to get through this armour. The IS armour is not bad, but when you're down tiered like this, you cannot count on it holding up at all. So the Conway just drove forward, gave their tank away, but that has allowed Super Ranger a little bit of time to get more damage in, so that's that Primo Victoria done, and it's just the T20 left in that corner now. Meanwhile, however, things are not looking so rosy elsewhere. They've lost all of their tier 9s at this point, and the only thing that has any level of armour left now is the Super Pershing, which is not the most mobile machine. So he spots the 12T coming up behind him, but he was angled pretty horribly there. He took the risk and aimed his gun, but it didn't really pay off. He is sitting, however, at over 4,000 damage done – at this stage, so things could certainly be worse. So, it looks like the Super Pershing is intent on capping. The T-20, I don't know why they were down there alone, but they've managed to die to the 131, and rather than follow out and get blasted by these scouts, because he's on pretty low health now, he turns back to join the Super Pershing and maybe see if he can't speed the cap up a little bit. But they're not really in a good position to cap. Especially not with those scouts able to easily pop round. And, oh yes, by the way, there's still a full health T95 in play as well. This has been a really good game for the T95. I mean, for one thing, it's about the best matchmaking you could get, and for another, it's about the best map you could get. And given that that T95 didn't really have any opponents that could challenge them frontally, and given that they were able to only ever engage things frontally, I'm going to guess they're going to come out of this with quite a good score. So it really is just the deconstruction of the final tanks at this stage. This Super Pershing doesn't really stand a chance. If they'd been able to cohesively, you know, group up, take out the scouts and then mob the T95, this would be maybe a different result. But as it was, no, nobody was in a position to group up, take out the scouts and then mob the T95. And so they all just got picked apart, which is really unfortunate for Super Ranger because he had a very good game. By far the best game of anybody on his team. And it's often the problem when you're down tiered like this. If your higher tier tanks are just not quite good enough, there's not a huge amount that you can do to overcome that, even if you are playing really well yourself. And it's not like the enemy team. A lot of them weren't doing that well, but that, as I say, that T95 was in an excellent position to have a good game, and they did. Didn't help that his own team had 5 people with 0 damage, though. Certainly didn't help. So despite the fact that it was a somewhat unfortunate loss, that had to be a bit galling, it was at least a close loss, and Super Ranger himself did do very well in that one. So onto a current patch game. This is Menthel in the LTG, the Tier 7 Soviet light tank, which is quite possibly one of the ugliest looking machines in the game. The hull is just a weird flat box. And then the turret itself is, I don't even know what to make of it, but it's a very unusual shape. It's not a pretty symmetrical machine. It's definitely got a face that only its mother could love. As a scout tank, it does seem like a bit of a mixed bag. The mobility is pretty good, on a par with a lot of the other tier 7s. It's got a very good top speed and a very good power to weight ratio. But in terms of both its firepower and its view range particularly, it seems a bit lacking. It's basically got the same gun as the T-34-85. So it's what, 144 average pen? Damage wise it's not bad, but yeah, given that you can see tier 9s, that's not so great. And it's not the only tank, the only light tank at this tier that has insufficient penetration, really. And it does at least have a decent DPM. But yeah, the part where it does seem to be particularly lackluster is that it's only got 360 base view range. The next worst is 370, and there are in fact a couple at tier 7 that have 390. So 360 starts to look somewhat grossly inadequate. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird mix, this machine. It's very low profile, and I'm sure it has got a good camo rating, but in terms of actually scouting things or doing lots of damage, I mean, there's probably a reason that Menthel here has a fair bit of APCR on their tank. He is, however, managing to get a little bit of spotting done so far, although mainly through proximity than anything else. And he's also got to be a little bit careful here as well, because that Scorpion could easily hit him. But it seems like there aren't really any other enemy tanks. So although on that flank, so although this is a bit of an exposed position, as long as he's careful about that Scorpion G, potentially, well, that was very lucky. Potentially he could make some further good use of this position. But yeah, he really does have to be careful because that Scorpion G could two-shot him. So as the Scorpions pull forward, and basically all the action is on the other flanks at the moment, he can maybe do a little more spotting and potentially even get some damage done, help his allies out, because there's a fair few tanks that are trying to push through that western castle area. But of course, every time he gets spotted like that, he is going to have to just assume that the Scorpion will try and take a shot at him. So that's going to limit his damage dealing right now, the potential he has for just sitting still and plugging away. So once again, looking for shots on either flank, and oh hello, the Tiger P has moved. That might represent an opportunity. So if he can get around behind that guy and takes a bit of a shot on the move as he's going, then that might be some more damage he can do, because the side and rear armour is certainly not going to be any challenge for this gun. The T20 has also gone for it, so it's not just him trying to take out this Tiger P alone. And although the DPM on this is good, as I've said, you know, it's medium tank damage, which is usual for a light tank, so it's not going to be a particularly quick kill if he has to do it himself. But unfortunately, as he's doing that, the Scorpion G pops up again and takes out that T20, so that's some of the very small amount of support he had in the middle gone. It's basically now him and a T95 that's going to take ages to get anywhere. The other flank, the eastern flank, however, does seem to have been won, although at a cost, and the western flank seems to be completely bogged down, so there's no clear movement either way at the moment, but that does potentially give him some more clear reign in terms of running around the place, at least once this tortoise is out of the way, because of course the tortie is really not something he wants to deal with this gun. He can potentially penetrate the rear armour, but anywhere else he's going to seriously struggle. As, however, the tortie, where we know where they are, that does give him an opportunity to try and pick on that T44 a bit, and with them gone, that leaves the western flank clear, although it's now just a Carnarvon there that survived. There was a real war of attrition there. And again, this is going to be a close one, but it does seem like they are now starting to be in a winning position, because he's got allied artillery he can spot for, so he doesn't have to rush in and try and do all of the damage himself. He can be a little bit more cautious and spot this tortie, and at that point, well, the Scorpion he can easily damage, and then there's artillery as well. So just trying to get some further spotting on the tortie, although that wasn't his, unfortunately, which is, you know, it would be nice to get it, but as they've been whacking away, he suddenly feels a burst of confidence to go and try and point blank into the rear, and it does actually pay. And I think he's just auto-aiming there, so yeah, that'll do it. If you can get the rear armour, then absolutely. So with that out the way, and with the Scorpion's position established, nice on the move hit there, he's absolutely free to go and nail artillery at this point. And I might even have loaded an HE shell myself at this stage, because these artillery are, well, at least this one, the GW Panther, you could get a bit more damage out of it by hitting the gun shield. So it takes a bit of splash and avoids really taking much damage from either of these, so he should be able to get this kill, and that'll be a nice final kill for the game. However, there's going to be a final plot twist in that he aims at the thickest part of the armour, gets the kill through ramming, and then takes some artillery damage from his teammate who was getting greedy for the kill. So there we go. But he did end that one with an ace and a kamikaze from ramming that artillery to death, tank sniper for obviously some nice accurate gunfire there, and a Confederate medal as well. So between the 2300 damage done and the 1800 plus spotting and assistance damage, all in all, it was a pretty nice result and enough to put him at the top of the team. And I feel like that's one of those games where you can point to somebody in a light tank doing light tank things and say, yes, they really did notably contribute to winning the game there, because that's not always the case. Sometimes you just don't get the opportunities. But as it was, Menthil saw that gap in the middle, saw the opportunity to use the slope of that hill against his enemies, and ended up getting quite a nice result out of it. So lastly we come to our warships game. This time it is going to be Zebedee in the Des Moines, the Tier 10 US cruiser, or, well, these days one of the Tier 10 US cruisers, because of course there's now the Worcester in the game as well. Now this is a dangerous ship to come up against. I don't own it myself, but I've played against it plenty of times. The real-life Des Moines was fitted with an auto-loading mechanism, so it boasted a fairly impressive rate of fire, and of course that's true in-game as well. It's not quite as fast as a light cruiser, like the Minotaur or the Worcester, but still, you don't want to be on the wrong end of these guns. It's that rate of fire really coupled with the heavy cruiser shells that will mess you up quite badly. And if you're a battleship, it's not just the HE you want to worry about. If you give broadside to a Des Moines, the AP can do you a nasty in a very short space of time as well. Now, of course, being a US cruiser, it also has a radar available, so that's what we see Zebedee using here as he approaches the sea cap. But he's made a somewhat unpleasant discovery in that there's a Yamato down there as well. Although they are positioned quite terribly, at this range the AP is probably not going to really be the most effective choice of ammo. So he's going with his HE shells, he's trying to set some fires, but he's also hastily trying to back off, because of course the Yamato shells just lol pen everything, literally everything. I don't think there's any armour in the game that won't just get overmatched by those guns. So he's taking a slight risk here. I mean, he's clearly still spotted by the Shima, but rather than backing all the way off round the corner, he's counting on the Yamato either firing at something else or just having poor RNG. But that Yamato's definitely still aimed at him. I mean, they're not playing well at all. Sitting broadside like that in the Yamato is an invitation to punishment. And I'm surprised the allied battleships behind him haven't done more to this guy. But yeah, still, that second salvo that Zebedee took was a little unpleasant. Of course, this being a high-tier cruiser, he does have a heal, but even so, you don't want to trade away your hit points too lightly. So we're a little further ahead, not too much, like 30-40 seconds. And the Yamato, as you can see, is backed off, and Zebedee may have been thinking about pushing into sea, because if the Shimakaze is still around here, they're not within surface spotting distance. But then he gets lit up by that Buffalo. And in the meantime, well, his team have capped both A and B, but they are now losing A and B. So it's given them a nice early points lead, but it seems doubtful they will hold on to that. So there's that Yamato again, who's taking advantage of him being lit up from the radar to chip away a little bit more health, but of course in firing he's revealed himself, so Zebedee can get some shots in return, although not quite accounting for how much lead he's going to need there, because of course these are US cruiser shells, they're not particularly fast. To be fair though, Zebedee did say that as of, like, the email where he sent me this replay, as of playing this game, this is still a relatively new ship to him. So he can be forgiven for maybe not always correctly getting how much lead he's going to need. And hell, I still do that with ships that I've played a lot. But I tend to be the kind of player that jumps around between ships. I don't tend to play the same ship over and over again, which is, you know, if you're doing that, then you get very familiar with the characteristics, and there have been occasions where I've ground one particular ship for, you know, I don't know, a dozen battles in a row kind of thing, when there was some specific goal I have in mind, and you get quite familiar with the quirks and the ins and outs, and you know, it kind of settles in your brain exactly how much lead you're going to need and how exactly it handles in the water. But I don't normally play like that. I normally jump around a lot, and so you don't quite get that familiarity. So trying to set more fires on the Yamato, and he's cautiously pushing forwards a bit. They've also got the sea cap, which he helped do, so we got a ribbon for that, which is more points. But they've lost the other 2 caps, and it's looking a bit messy on the minimap overall. It doesn't seem like they've got much hope of retaking A, and in fact the teammates he does have over there are somewhat outnumbered. Not hugely so, but enough that they're either going to have to back off or they're probably just going to get destroyed. There's a chance of retaking the B cap, however, and he's therefore moving up alongside this Moskva, although the Moskvas neatly tucked themselves around the corner, and that's not quite true for Zebedee here, but his armour is going to hold up far better against these 8-inch buffalo shells. I'm not entirely sure why the Moskva didn't also peek out, unless they just were a bit wary of that Yamato, which is fair enough. It's not the most manoeuvrable ship, the Moskva, so trying to do some delicate manoeuvring to show just enough of your ship to only poke the front out and fire your front guns is not necessarily going to work when you're tucked in that tightly against an island like that. So he's just trading HE salvos with this Buffalo. The Yamato shouldn't be in a position to shoot him, but he's starting to get within range of things over more near the A cap, so he can't necessarily hang around here forever. So that's that Buffalo done, finished off by fellow Missouri. There was, is that a Benson? I can't quite tell on the minimap, but there was an enemy destroyer last spotted somewhere near the B cap, and they haven't been seen for a while, but you can't assume that they've gone away completely. You know, to the next map, I guess. I don't know what I'm saying, but yeah, there's also 2 other enemy destroyers still in play as well, so they are, you know, they are something you're going to have to keep in mind. There's something to be wary about, because even with radar, well, you've still got to pick and choose the right time to use radar, so it's not a magical anti-destroyer button by any means. Although these days, when there can be, especially at high tiers, a lot of radar around, especially in domination games, it really changes how things play. An individual ship with radar is maybe not that much of a problem for a destroyer, from their point of view. But if you have 4 or even 5 ships with radar, they can lock down quite large swathes of the map very effectively. So trying to use those US shell arcs to fire over the edge of this island without being spotted, but something is spotting him, and it's either that phj.wotreplays or maybe there's something on open water that's not in that smoke cloud, that maybe laid that smoke cloud and then went out of it. But no, I think it probably was the phj.wotreplays, just given that Zebedee does get unspotted relatively quickly. So there's probably no destroyers to the immediate north or south. And he does now have that Moskva giving some screening in terms of not getting destroyers appearing very suddenly. But yeah, what's left of his team is basically all in this area, apart from the Missouri that's a bit further south. So we've kind of ended up with a situation where they're capping the middle, and that puts them in a position where if they can hold on to that middle cap, then that's great. But the enemy team is now starting to seriously put some pressure on them from the other side. So it really does all come down to this middle cap. And they've lost their own destroyers at this stage as well. So that might be a factor, because the enemy team's still got 3 of theirs. And if nothing else, it means there aren't any destroyers available to harass the enemy team. And it also means that they are entirely dependent on the Moskva and Zebedee here in the Des Moines for spotting on these destroyers, essentially. And there's the Missouri with a radar as well, of course. So he's spotted once again. Not entirely sure what would be spotting him right now. That must be a destroyer, surely. We're also seeing the AP at work here, and he was getting some nice salvos there. Could have had even more out of that, in fact, if the DeGrosser there had been higher health, but as it was, he's probably just happy that that's one less enemy ship to deal with. This is definitely a destroyer that's lighting him up right now, though, because there's really nothing else that could have been while he was firing. Nothing to his front, certainly, and it seems unlikely that it would have been anything to the south, so possibly there was something passing along the north? maybe one of the enemy destroyers is going for the sea cap. We'll see. Anyway, that Conqueror is pretty nice. Not Conqueror, Lion, almost a Conqueror. That's a pretty nice target, and unsurprisingly they're firing HE right back at Zebedee. It's not too much of a surprise when you meet that ship doing that, although personally I prefer to use the AP where possible. That is my latest tier 10 acquisition as of recording this, is the Conqueror. So it's been interesting because the guns you start off with, well, I think they're the guns you see most people using, but it also has those 18-inch guns, which I do want to try at some point. So as it turns out, yes, there was a Shima going for C. There is also a destroyer in the cap, and the third and final one, the Benson, is very close by. And all the rest of his team that's left are now to his south. So that puts Zebedee in a somewhat awkward position. Because although this thing does have a fast rate of fire, he's going to have to, like, if a destroyer comes around the corner, he might nuke them, but the question is, will he nuke them fast enough to kill them before they get torpedoes away? So this is definitely a dicey position. And also, if nothing else, they're losing the B cap and the C cap at the same time. So there's that Shima. He could actually have shots on the Shima, but chooses not to rotate his turrets around. His secondaries are popping away a little bit and getting him a couple of defense flags, but no, he'd rather keep his turrets to the front for now. And the Shima obviously realizes this because they put in a couple of cheeky salvos themselves. It's not often you'll see a Shima feeling brave enough to fire their guns at a Des Moines, but if you can be certain that the Des Moines isn't going to fire back at you, then that's fair enough. So he's established the positions of those destroyers with his radar, but he's not necessarily in a position to do anything about it right now in terms of actually going and tackling them. And so it looks initially like he's going to push into the cap, but it is probably more just the case that he was trying to keep his angling and maybe fake out a bit to bait somebody's drop. And so makes that last minute turn, doesn't run aground, and in fact does bait somebody's drop. And that cheeky Shimakaze is still firing at him though, which is just, you know, I suppose, how often do you get to do that in a Shima? I suppose I absolutely would be doing the same thing myself. So, we reached the stage where it might be a little bit annoying in terms of watching, but you can understand why Zebedee would have his head on a swivel quite this much, because there's a lot to keep track of right now. The enemy team is still ahead on points. They badly need some of these caps back, and although this does seem like it's winnable, it would also be rather easy to throw it away. So again, pings his radar, establishes the position of the Shima, who has positioned themselves such that nobody coming around, at least, you know, and using radar, is going to get an easy spot on him. And so, although Zebedee is firing, this is close range enough that his shells aren't arcing over the island, and it's only really as he clears the edge of the island that he does start to get shots, at which point the Shima pings his radar. And I think the Shima must have been paying attention previously to when Zebedee was using radar before, and had guessed correctly that he doesn't have the radar mod. At least I don't think he has the radar mod. Is it normally that long, or is this with the radar mod? Anyway, I don't actually know. I probably should know that, because, you know, I do have the is it the Buffalo, the Tier 9 heavy cruiser. Yeah, anyway, my point is the Shima was paying attention to what his radar duration was and waited until he was sure that it was towards the end of it before triggering his smoke. So, you know, paying attention to things like this absolutely does help you. And because he now doesn't have his radar available again, and because the Shima had laid that smoke, and he was maybe spotted a bit from elsewhere, or possibly he was just spotted by the Shima himself, the Shima actually managed to get a reset as well by firing across the smoke. It's not enough to stop Zebedee from capping though. They've also recapped the middle, and, well, we're well into the last minute at this stage. The enemy team is still ahead on points. There is a Hindenburg left. The only remaining cap they have is being blocked by the Bismarck. Sebedy fires off radar, because why not? We're in the dying seconds. Picks up the Shimakaze. And, well, this is cutting it mighty fine. But, well, for all the Shimas played it relatively smart in the latter part of this game, instead of just zooming straight south to stay alive, they were rather too close to Sebedy going through the middle, so his radar absolutely picked him up. And can he get this final kill? There we go. So between the Hindi going down to his allies and Sebedy picking up that Shima, that was a win, but it was an awfully close one. Still though, Sebedy himself did pretty well out of that. 173k damage and a Witherer medal. Easily top of the team with 2500. But I think we have to give some praise to that Moskva that was around him a lot as well. They clearly were not slacking. And the team's Conqueror did pretty well. And the Rune also, who was one of the people alive towards the end. All above 2k. That's not that usual to see that many people with above 2k base XP in a game. So some people pulling fairly hard to turn that round to be a victory at the end there. So there's not really a lot left to say at this stage. That was a very close, enjoyable match, I thought, and if this video has any kind of theme at all, it's that all the matches were relatively close, although maybe not that LTG game so much. I mean, it was still a somewhat close, hard-fought match, but perhaps not so much compared to the bookends, as it were. Anyway, if you have enjoyed this video, if you can, well, you can check out my Patreon page. I need to remember to at least mention that once in a while. You can also do all the usual things down below the video, hitting the like button, comments, etc. You can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.